The mail-order bride was returned at the station, until a cowboy lifted her trunk and called her wife. Clara clutched the handle of her worn trunk, her fingers white from gripping it too tightly during the long journey from the east. Every mile had been a trial, every day a reminder of the new life she was risking everything to find. She had left her small hometown, her family, and the life she had known behind, hoping that this new place, this new man, could offer her a fresh start. Yet as she stepped onto the platform, her heart pounded with nervous anticipation. Clara had imagined this moment countless times on the train. She pictured the man waiting for her with a smile, ready to welcome her into a life of comfort, security, and perhaps love. But reality hit before she even set her eyes on him. The man who was supposed to be her husband stood several feet away, his hands resting on his hips, eyes narrowing as he examined her. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn but expensive clothes that marked him as someone used to getting his way. Clara's chest tightened as she approached, her steps small and cautious, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Clara," he called, his voice sharp and distant. She nodded, unsure if she should speak. "You're not what I expected," he said finally, his words heavy with judgment. Clara's heart sank. She had dressed in her best clothes, brushed her hair until it shone, and tried to appear composed and confident. Yet he looked at her with something closer to disappointment than curiosity or kindness. Every word felt like a blow, every glance a reminder that she might have made a terrible mistake leaving home. Clara forced a smile, hoping that politeness and grace could soften his harsh demeanor. "I am Clara," she said softly. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear she tried to hide. But the man barely glanced at her, shifting his gaze back to the horizon as though she were already invisible. He muttered something to the station master, who nodded and turned to Clara with a polite, awkward expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the station master said gently. He doesn't want you." She had traveled across states, left everything familiar behind, and now she was being sent back. The station felt suddenly vast, empty, and hostile. The platform's wooden planks creaked under her feet, echoing her own uncertainty. The few townspeople who had paused to watch the arrival looked away quickly, as if not wanting to witness the humiliation of a woman abandoned at the station. Clara's hands tightened on her trunk. It felt heavier than ever, as if it were filled not only with her belongings but also with her crushed hopes and dreams. She was instructed to wait for the next train back east. Clara sat on her trunk, her legs swinging slightly, her eyes fixed on the tracks. The station was quiet now, except for the occasional whistle of a distant train and the low murmur of wind. Her heart ached with shame and fear. She tried to imagine what her family would think if they knew she was being sent home like a failure. She tried not to think about the lonely nights ahead or the uncertain future. Every imagined scenario seemed worse than the last. And yet, amidst the despair, a small flicker of hope refused to die. Perhaps, she thought, this was just the first obstacle, a test she had to survive to find her real life. Hours passed slowly. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara noticed small acts of kindness around her. A storekeeper stepped outside and handed her a glass of water with a gentle smile. A child, no older than 8, offered her a wildflower, picked fresh from the dusty roadside. Clara accepted it with a quiet thank you, feeling warmth spread through her chest for the first time since the arrival. These small gestures reminded her that even in rejection and disappointment, there was still humanity, still goodness in the world. She clutched the flower in her hand as if it were a talisman against the fear and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm her. As the station grew quieter with the coming evening, Clara noticed a man leaning against a post a short distance away. He was rugged, dressed in worn denim and leather, with a hat that shaded his eyes. He didn't approach, didn't call out, just observed her silently. There was a calmness in his posture, a confidence that didn't come from arrogance but from experience and quiet strength. Clara felt a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. She had no idea who he was or why he was watching, but there was something reassuring in his presence, a hint that she might not be entirely alone in this strange town. Clara thought about her journey again, about the long train ride, the nights spent in crowded, noisy compartments, and the endless landscapes rushing by outside the window. Each memory was bittersweet now. She remembered the kindness of the conductor who had helped her with her trunk at each stop, the small meals she had shared with strangers who had become brief companions, and the letters she had written to her family, filled with hope and excitement. All of it seemed distant, almost unreal, as she sat there at the station, waiting for a future she no longer dared to imagine. The air turned cooler as the sun set completely, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues. Clara pulled her shawl tightly around her shoulders, shivering slightly, though not entirely from the cold. The loneliness pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She tried to distract herself by organizing her trunk, checking that nothing was lost or broken during the journey. But even these small tasks could not stop the tide of fear and uncertainty. She was a stranger in a strange land, rejected by the very person she had trusted to start a new life, and she had no idea what would come next. Night fell fully, and the station was nearly deserted. Clara could hear the faint rustle of animals moving nearby, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of an old windmill turning somewhere down the street. The thought of waiting alone through the night made her stomach tighten. Yet, she did not cry. She did not allow herself the luxury of despair beyond what she had already felt. She knew she had to be strong to survive the night, to survive the rejection, and perhaps to survive whatever new fate awaited her. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that her story was not over, that the journey she had begun was only at its first chapter, and that courage, patience, and resilience would be her companions until something better came along. As she sat there, clutching her trunk and the small flower given by the child, Clara allowed herself a single, deep breath. She looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the sky, each one tiny but bright against the dark canvas of night. They reminded her of the possibilities that still existed, of lives unfolding far beyond the limits of this small town, and of the hope that one day, she too would find a place where she belonged. The station no longer felt entirely like a place of humiliation, but as a crossroads, a moment suspended between what had been lost and what could still be gained. And even though the night was long and the future uncertain, Clara refused to give up. She would wait, she would endure, and she would see what tomorrow brought. Hours stretched into the late night, and the sound of distant trains became her lullaby, rocking her with their gentle rhythm. Clara leaned back against her trunk, letting her eyes close for a brief rest. Her body ached from travel and tension, but her mind remained alert, listening to the small sounds of life around her. Somewhere in the quiet darkness, the presence of the man who had been watching from a distance was still there, silent but steady, like a guardian she did not yet know she needed. And in that quiet moment, as the stars shone overhead and the wind whispered softly through the empty streets, Clara allowed herself the smallest spark of hope, a fragile ember that perhaps her story was far from over, and that even in rejection, there could be the beginning of something new. Clara sat on her trunk, the small flower the child had given her clutched in her hand. The station was quiet now, the bustle of the midday crowd long gone, replaced by the slow, lonely rhythm of evening. Every creak of the wooden platform beneath her felt louder, every whistle of a distant train echoed in the still air. Her heart ached, not just from exhaustion, but from the sharp sting of rejection. She had come so far, left so much behind, and yet the man who was supposed to welcome her into a new life had refused her. She tried not to let the tears fall, pressing the small flower to her chest as if it could hold her courage together. The sun had disappeared completely, leaving behind a twilight that painted the station in soft shades of purple and blue. The air had grown cooler, and Clara drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She glanced at her trunk, heavy and unwieldy beside her. It was filled with her few possessions, clothes, letters, and the small items she had carried with hope across the long journey. Now, it seemed less like a treasure chest of possibilities and more like a burden she had to bear alone. She shifted her weight and sighed, feeling the tension of the long day settle into her muscles. As she sat there, Clara began to notice the small details around her. The station was no longer just a place of rejection. It was alive with subtle signs of the town's quiet life. The wind whispered through the wooden beams overhead, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant pine. A dog barked far off, somewhere behind the low hills, and the faint light of a lamp flickered from a nearby shop. Clara realized that she was not entirely alone, even if the person who was meant to meet her had abandoned her. There were still small threads of connection, tiny gestures of kindness, and the life of the town itself, continuing calmly around her. Minutes turned to hours, and Clara tried to keep herself occupied. She rearranged the contents of her trunk, folding clothes neatly and placing her letters carefully inside. Each task was small, but it gave her a sense of purpose in a moment that felt otherwise aimless. She took out a letter she had written to her mother weeks before, reading it again in the fading light. The words were filled with hope and excitement, a vision of the future she had imagined for herself. Now, they felt almost like a reminder of everything she had risked. Clara pressed the letter to her lips, whispering a quiet promise to herself that she would survive this night, no matter what. As darkness fell, the station became quieter still. The few townspeople who remained moved silently along the streets, casting brief glances at the lone figure sitting on the platform. Clara noticed one of them, an elderly man with a kind face, pause to watch her. He did not speak, did not approach, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes, a recognition that she was a traveler in a difficult moment of her life. Clara returned a small nod, feeling a little less invisible, a little less abandoned. It was a small comfort, but in a world that had already turned so cold, even a single acknowledgement of her presence felt significant. The wind stirred again, and Clara hugged her shawl tighter. She felt the loneliness pressing in, heavy and unyielding, but she refused to give in to despair. She reminded herself of the long journey she had taken, of the courage it had taken to leave everything familiar behind. She had faced uncertainty before, and she could face it again. Even if the man who had ordered her as a bride had rejected her, the world was still large, full of possibilities she had yet to see. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the faint sounds of the town at night, letting the rhythm of life around her soothe her fear. Hours passed slowly. Clara noticed the shadows stretching across the platform, the way the lamp light flickered against the wooden walls. She began to imagine the people who had once been strangers, now scattered in their homes, living their lives as she had once imagined hers. The quiet moments allowed her mind to wander, and she thought about what she wanted from life. Not just a home or a husband, but respect, kindness, and the chance to be seen for who she truly was. The rejection at the station had been harsh, but it had also made her realize what she would no longer tolerate. She would not allow anyone to diminish her worth again. As she sat lost in thought, a noise caught her attention. It was faint at first, the soft crunch of boots against the gravel outside the station. Clara opened her eyes, heart quickening. She could not see who it was, only the shadows moving in the dim light. A man appeared slowly, leaning against a post nearby. He was tall and strong, dressed in worn denim and leather, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. Clara felt a moment of instinctive caution, unsure if he was a friend or another observer of her humiliation. Yet there was something about his posture, calm, confident, and patient, that did not seem threatening. The man did not speak at first. He simply watched silently as Clara shifted on her trunk. There was no judgment in his gaze, no impatience. He seemed to understand without a word the weight of her situation. Clara found herself studying him as well. His hands were strong, the kind that could handle hard work, but there was a gentleness in the way he moved. He looked at her not as an object of curiosity, but as a person who had endured much and needed a moment of care. Clara felt a small spark of relief. Perhaps she was not entirely alone in this strange place. Minutes passed, and the man continued to observe silently. Clara found herself talking quietly to herself, a habit she had developed during long journeys to stay grounded. "I will not give up," she whispered. "I will survive this night. Tomorrow will be better." The man nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her words without breaking the silence. Clara smiled faintly, feeling a strange sense of comfort in the presence of a stranger who seemed to understand the value of patience and quiet support. The night deepened, and Clara remained on her trunk, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She thought about the journey ahead, what she would do when the train came to take her back east, how she would explain this rejection to her family, and whether she could find a way to make a life for herself here despite the harsh start. Her mind raced with questions, but she also felt a quiet determination growing within her. She had already faced fear, uncertainty, and humiliation. She could face whatever came next, armed with the strength she had carried all along. As the hours wore on, Clara began to notice the small comforts of the night. The stars appeared one by one in the sky, bright points of light against the dark canvas above. Each one seemed to remind her of the vastness of the world, of the endless possibilities beyond the boundaries of this small town. She thought about the people she had met on her journey, the conductor who had helped her with her trunk, the fellow passengers who had shared their stories and kindness, the child who had given her a flower. All of these moments reminded her that even in the darkest times there was goodness waiting to be discovered. The man leaning against the post shifted slightly, walking closer but still keeping a respectful distance. Clara noticed it but did not feel alarmed. There was a quiet confidence in the way he moved, a sense of awareness and care that felt reassuring. He did not speak yet, allowing her to remain in her space, acknowledging her presence without intrusion. Clara found herself curious about him, wondering who he was and why he had chosen to stay nearby. There was something in his calm demeanor that suggested he was someone who had seen hardship and understood it, someone who could offer help without judgment. Clara's thoughts drifted again, this time to the life she had hoped to build with the man who had rejected her. She realized that while her plans had been interrupted, they had not been destroyed. Life could still offer her a chance at happiness, perhaps in ways she had never imagined. She thought about the qualities she wanted in a companion: kindness, respect, strength, and the ability to see her as a person, not just as a bride on paper. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, yet within it, Clara felt the first stirrings of hope. The world might still have someone who would meet her with understanding and compassion. Finally, the station settled into a deep, quiet rhythm. The trains had stopped for the night, the townspeople had returned to their homes, and the wind whispered softly through the empty streets. Clara remained on her trunk, eyes fixed on the stars, holding the small flower in her hand as if it were a symbol of perseverance. The stranger was still nearby, a silent presence that made her feel less alone. She realized that even in rejection, even in despair, there was still a chance for connection, still a possibility for a new beginning. As she drifted into a light, restless sleep, leaning against her trunk, Clara allowed herself a single, quiet thought. Perhaps tomorrow would bring something she had not yet imagined. Perhaps someone would see her not as a disappointment, but as the person she truly was. And in that small hope, Clara found the strength to endure the long, lonely night, ready to face whatever the future might hold. The first light of morning crept slowly over the horizon, spilling pale gold across the dusty platform of the small frontier station. Clara stirred awake, still perched on her trunk, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The night had been long and quiet, and though she had rested, her body ached from sitting so long in one position. She opened her eyes, blinking against the soft sunlight, and felt a faint pang of fear. Today would bring the next step of her uncertain journey, and she had no idea what it would hold. The station was still quiet, save for the distant clatter of a train whistle in the distance. Clara straightened her back and adjusted her shawl, determined to face whatever came next with as much dignity as she could muster. She glanced around, hoping not to see the man who had rejected her the day before, and to her relief, there was no sign of him. The platform felt vast and empty, the only movement the swaying shadows of the wooden posts as the morning wind stirred them. Clara took a deep breath, willing herself to feel calm, though her heart still fluttered with anxiety. As she gathered her strength, she noticed movement across the platform. A figure appeared, approaching slowly, purposeful in stride but not hurried. The sun highlighted the man's broad shoulders and the ruggedness of his clothing. He wore worn denim and a leather vest, with a hat pulled low over his eyes, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the empty space around him. Clara felt a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. She did not know who he was, but there was something in the way he moved, careful, respectful, yet undeniably strong, that suggested he was someone who commanded attention without needing to demand it. The man stopped a few feet away, setting down a small satchel he carried. His eyes, partially shaded by the brim of his hat, studied Clara not with judgment but with a calm, steady interest. He did not speak immediately, giving her space to breathe and to gather herself. Clara felt her nerves settle slightly. There was no mockery in his gaze, no impatience or irritation, just a quiet acknowledgement of her presence. It was the first time in nearly a day that someone had looked at her without making her feel diminished. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low but warm, carrying a hint of curiosity rather than command. "You must be Clara," he said. Clara nodded, startled that he knew her name but also relieved that he spoke kindly. "I'm Jake," he added. Clara's heart skipped a beat. There was something in the tone, simple and direct, that immediately made her feel safer than she had in hours. He stepped closer but not too close, maintaining a respectful distance that allowed her to feel in control of her space. Clara tried to find her voice, and after a moment she said softly, I was supposed to meet someone else. He didn't want me." Her words trembled slightly, betraying the vulnerability she had tried to conceal. Jake nodded, his expression showing understanding rather than surprise. "I see," he said quietly. "That must have been hard." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. For the first time, someone acknowledged her feelings without dismissing them or making her feel foolish. Jake's eyes shifted to her trunk, the large, heavy chest that had been both her companion and her burden for days. Without waiting for her to respond, he stepped forward, grasped the handles, and lifted it effortlessly. Clara gasped, surprised at the strength he displayed. The trunk, which had felt impossibly heavy for her alone, seemed light in his hands. He carried it toward a waiting wagon with ease, setting it down gently. "Here," he said, "let's get this out of your way." Clara felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. He had not spoken a word of judgment, had not questioned her worth or appearance, but had simply acted to help. She followed him to the wagon, her steps tentative. Every motion of his was calm and measured, giving her a sense of safety she had not felt since leaving home. Jake opened the back of the wagon and placed her trunk inside, carefully arranging it so that it would not shift during the ride. Clara watched him silently, studying the way he worked, noting the quiet care in his movements. There was a kindness in him that was rare in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. Once the trunk was secured, Jake turned back to her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Clara hesitated, unsure if she should admit her exhaustion and fear, but something in his eyes, steady and patient, encouraged her honesty. I think so," she said finally, her voice still soft. "It's been a long journey." He nodded knowingly, as if he understood all that she had endured. "You've been through a lot," he said, "but don't worry. You won't be alone anymore." There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declaration, just quiet acknowledgement and the promise of help, which felt more powerful than anything else she had encountered. The wagon began to move slowly along the dusty road leading out of the town. Clara clutched the sides, her heart still pounding from a mix of relief and anticipation. She stole glances at Jake, noticing the ease with which he guided the horses, the confidence in his posture, and the warmth in his expression whenever he looked at her. She had imagined all sorts of possibilities for her life when she first agreed to become a mail-order bride, but she had never imagined this. A stranger stepping in, not with expectation or judgment, but with simple kindness and quiet strength. As they traveled, Clara began to speak more freely. She told Jake a little about her journey, about the long train ride and the excitement she had felt when leaving home. She admitted her fear, her doubts, and the disappointment of being rejected at the station. Jake listened intently, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never offering platitudes. He simply heard her, and that in itself was a gift. Clara realized that this was the first time in days that she had felt understood, that her experiences were valid and acknowledged. Hours passed as they moved along the winding dirt roads. The landscape gradually changed, from the dusty plains near the town to rolling hills dotted with sparse trees and the occasional ranch house. Clara noticed how the air felt fresher, how the wind carried a scent of pine and earth, and how the sunlight seemed warmer here than it had at the station. She felt a quiet sense of calm settle over her, a feeling she had not known since the rejection at the train station. Jake seemed attuned to her mood, guiding the horses steadily, speaking when necessary, but mostly allowing her to settle into the rhythm of the ride. Eventually, they arrived at Jake's ranch. The house was modest but solid, built of sturdy wood and surrounded by a few outbuildings and fields. Clara's eyes widened slightly at the sight. This was a place where a person could build a life, where work and purpose met with safety and security. Jake led her to the porch where they set down her trunk. "Welcome home," he said simply. Clara blinked, momentarily taken aback. She had not expected to hear those words, not yet, not from someone she had just met. Yet in the way he said them calmly, without ceremony or pressure, they carried weight. They were a promise, not a command. Clara allowed herself a small laugh, a mix of relief and disbelief. "Home," she repeated softly, testing the word on her lips. It felt strange but also comforting. For the first time in days, she felt that she might belong somewhere, that she might have a chance to start anew in a place that respected her as a person. Jake watched her with quiet patience, allowing her to process the change from fear and rejection to safety and possibility. Over the next few hours, Jake helped Clara settle in. He showed her the layout of the house, where she could store her belongings, and even where she could find fresh water and a place to rest. He did not rush her, did not ask for anything in return, and did not offer advice unless she requested it. Clara marveled at his patience and respect, realizing that these simple qualities were rarer than she had imagined. She felt her confidence begin to return, small piece by small piece, as she recognized that she had found someone who saw her as more than just a traveler or a rejection. By evening, Clara was sitting on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. Jake joined her, carrying 2 mugs of warm tea. He handed one to her with a gentle smile. "You've had a long day," he said. "You deserve a moment to rest." Clara accepted the mug, feeling the warmth seep into her hands. She took a sip, savoring the taste, and allowed herself to relax slightly. For the first time since arriving at the station, she felt a sense of peace. She was no longer alone, no longer rejected, and no longer powerless. As night fell over the ranch, Clara reflected on the day's events. From the despair at the train station to the quiet kindness of a stranger who became her guide, she had experienced a journey of emotions unlike any she had ever imagined. She realized that life could change in an instant, that hope could appear when least expected, and that courage was not just about enduring hardship, but about being open to new possibilities. With Jake's presence beside her, she felt a glimmer of hope that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could find respect, companionship, and maybe even love. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, painting the fields with golden light. Clara woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. She stretched, feeling the cool wooden floor beneath her and the warmth of the sun as it touched her face. Last night had been a turning point in her life, though she was only beginning to understand it. For the first time since leaving home, she felt safe, cared for, and accepted. The weight of rejection had lifted, replaced with a quiet anticipation for what today might bring. Clara moved to the porch, holding a cup of tea she had prepared for herself. The vast landscape stretched before her, rolling hills, grazing animals, and the distant outline of the mountains. She felt a sense of peace she had never experienced before. The ranch was alive with possibility, each sound and movement around her signaling the start of a new chapter. Jake emerged from the house carrying a small basket of supplies and greeted her with a smile. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm and steady, the kind of voice that made people feel grounded. Clara returned his greeting, smiling back, and felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't realized she was missing. The morning passed with small tasks. Jake showed Clara how to feed the animals, how to care for the chickens, and how to check the water troughs for the horses. Clara listened carefully, following his instructions, and discovered that the work was hard but satisfying. Her hands, once delicate from a life of city comforts, were now learning the calluses of labor. Each task she completed filled her with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Jake watched her closely, offering guidance when necessary but never condescension, never making her feel inferior. Clara realized that she was learning more than just ranch work. She was learning her own strength, her ability to adapt, and her resilience. As the day wore on, Clara grew more comfortable in the rhythm of the ranch. She moved with increasing confidence, carrying water and feed, brushing the horses, and even laughing at her occasional clumsy mistakes. Jake encouraged her gently, praising her effort without making her feel like she owed him anything. Clara felt something shift inside her. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could truly belong somewhere, like her presence had meaning and value beyond her appearance or what someone else expected of her. The ranch, with its wide-open spaces and honest work, became a place where she could breathe freely, unburdened by past disappointments. During a break in the afternoon, Jake and Clara sat on the porch, looking out over the fields. The sun was warm on their faces, and the soft wind carried the scent of grass and earth. Clara held the small flower she had received at the station weeks before, now slightly wilted but still bright with color. She thought about the journey she had taken, the train ride, the long wait at the station, and the humiliation of being rejected. And yet none of it seemed quite so heavy now. She had survived, and more than that, she had found someone who treated her with respect and care. Jake turned to her, his expression serious but kind. "You've come a long way," he said. "I know today is only the beginning, but I want you to know that you are welcome here, as long as you want to be." Clara felt a rush of emotion. The words were simple, yet they carried a promise she had longed to hear. She nodded, holding back tears, and whispered, "Thank you, Jake. I think I could be happy here." He smiled, not the polite, distant smile of a stranger, but a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. It was the first time she had felt seen for who she truly was, and the feeling was almost overwhelming. The evening brought another set of tasks. Clara helped gather eggs from the chicken coop, fed the horses one last time, and carried water for the livestock. Her movements were steadier now, her confidence growing with each small accomplishment. Jake followed beside her, offering assistance only when necessary, allowing her to learn and succeed on her own. Clara felt a deep sense of pride in herself. She realized that the strength she had thought lost or dormant was still inside her. It had merely been waiting for the right place and the right guidance to emerge. After the chores were completed, the two of them returned to the porch, settling into a comfortable silence. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned a deep, rich shade of purple. Clara looked at Jake, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the sun and everything to do with the presence of someone who cared. She realized that her journey had led her to this moment, not just to a place of safety, but to a person who could become a partner in life, someone who respected her and valued her for herself. The thought made her heart flutter with a quiet, steady excitement. As night fell, the ranch became quiet except for the sounds of animals settling in for the night. Clara sat on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, and watched the stars begin to appear. Each one seemed to symbolize the possibilities of her new life, small points of light in the darkness. Jake joined her, handing her a warm mug of tea. "You've done well today," he said. "I can see you're getting the hang of ranch life." Clara smiled, sipping her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her body and her spirit. "It's different," she admitted, "but I think I like it. I think I can belong here." Jake nodded, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. Days turned into weeks, and Clara grew stronger, more confident, and more at home on the ranch. She learned to ride horses properly, to care for the animals, and to manage small tasks around the house. She began to see the town in a new light as well. The people who had once ignored or pitied her now treated her with respect, noticing her hard work and her courage. Clara felt a sense of pride in herself, not because anyone told her she was worthy, but because she knew it in her heart. She had survived rejection, endured hardship, and discovered her own strength along the way. Jake and Clara grew closer over this time. Their companionship was built not on grand declarations, but on shared work, quiet conversations, and small gestures of care. He showed her the land, teaching her to read the weather, recognize the signs of the animals, and understand the rhythms of life on the ranch. Clara listened, learned, and applied herself, earning his respect and gradually his trust. She felt the beginnings of affection, a feeling that grew steadily as they spent long days together under the wide-open sky. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low behind the hills, Jake turned to Clara with a serious look. He walked over to her, reaching out to lift her trunk once more, just as he had done at the station. Clara laughed softly, a sound full of warmth and familiarity. "You really don't need to keep lifting that," she said, shaking her head. Jake smiled, but his gaze softened. "I don't mind," he said simply. "It's yours and I want to help, that's all." Clara felt her heart swell. These simple words, this simple act of care, carried more meaning than anything grand or dramatic could. It was a declaration of respect, of partnership, and of genuine affection. That evening, as they watched the stars emerge in the sky, Jake spoke again. "Clara," he said, his voice steady, "I want you to know that you are welcome here, not just as a helper, not just as a guest, but as part of this life. If you choose to stay, you'll have a home, respect, and someone who values you for who you are." Clara looked at him, feeling a warmth she had never known. She realized that she had found something rare, a place where she could belong, a person who would see her as an equal, and a chance to build a life filled with dignity and care. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of gratitude and hope. "Thank you," she whispered. I want that. I want to stay." Jake smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made her heart lift. "Then you are my wife," he said simply, without ceremony or fanfare, but with a quiet certainty that made the words feel like a promise and a foundation all at once. Clara's heart leapt. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of commitment, care, and a future she could now envision clearly. The following weeks were filled with small joys, steady work, and growing companionship. Clara settled fully into the rhythm of ranch life, her confidence blossoming with each passing day. She learned not just the work of the land, but the joy of shared purpose and mutual respect. Jake continued to treat her with kindness, patience, and encouragement, and their bond grew stronger with each shared sunrise and sunset. Clara realized that she had found more than a home. She had found a life worth living, a life built on trust, care, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Clara stood on the porch with Jake, watching the golden light spill across the fields. She felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that the journey that had begun with fear and rejection had led her to a place of belonging. She turned to him, a soft smile on her lips, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Jake took her hand gently, squeezing it in response. "I did," he said. "I always did." And in that moment, under the wide, open sky filled with stars, Clara knew that her life had truly begun.